You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 249 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. I just want to first thank all the listeners because, 249 episodes is far more than I ever thought I was going to do. And the fact that, so many people continue to tune in is why I'm doing it. So I really appreciate it. I have so many of you that listen to the show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. There is a private Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus, for those of you who want to, talk foreign policy on Facebook. And so just really thank you for continuing to share the show and help it to grow. And I really hope you continue to do so. The best places to find the show are the Libertarian Institute, right there on the homepage of the website, libertarianinstitute.org. You could find the show and my daily news roundup as well. The website for the show, if you want to just go there directly, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. The show's on iTunes. You give me a rating and review there. YouTube, the channel name is Immersion News. Same for BitChute. The show's also on Spotify, iHeartRadio. I believe somebody told me it was on the Google Play Store or however that works. And then the Libertarian Institute podcast feed, the all podcast feed, it's up there as well. So all those are the best places to subscribe, rate, and view. Anything you do to help get the show out there and make it easy for yourself to listen to. All right, so I want to talk about China a little bit on today's show, and at some point I really need to get, somebody who knows a lot about like China on the show to just talk about a more general U.S. foreign policy, but I'm going to actually start by talking about Venezuela. Under the Trump administration, it does seem like the policy towards Venezuela is becoming slightly more hawkish, especially in rhetoric, mostly coming from leaks from the White House. Now, I feel like we always have to be careful about these stories, and this isn't to give too much credit towards Trump, but I think more just the standard of today's media and reporting about what's happening in the Trump White House, where we get story after story that Trump either wants to look at a military invasion of Venezuela or look at, maybe a direct coup attempt or, possibly like an assassination against Maduro. We also heard the same thing from the Bob Woodward book about Assad. So, this could be some, White House staffer hearing that, Trump floated the idea, but maybe, this is just like Trump's personality and he does these things in jest and no real serious. Or it's a way for, maybe to just shift the discussion point in the room. That's maybe part of his negotiating strategy. I don't know. Or it could be that Trump actually believes these things. And I do think that on the Venezuela issue, it does seem at least somewhat likely that Trump is taking a very hawkish position there. Now, one administration official who's very publicly hawkish against the Venezuelan regime, and that is U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley. This isn't like one of those definite things I could say, and somebody could bring up a counter example, but she does seem to be the most, at least publicly hawkish of the Trump administration officials against Venezuela. Very much, hanging out with people there who are, really in opposition, UN funded or NGO funded opposition to Maduro. The Trump administration has put quite a few sanctions on the Venezuelan regime, and I think has really attempted to target the people around Maduro. Now, there was that interesting New York Times story, and I think one of the flaws with that story is there's, pretty much no named sources on there. They are able to corroborate to some extent some of the, allegations that the people who tell this story make, but I think it's far from conclusive this happened. But the story goes that Trump administration officials met with a Venezuelan coup plotter. The coup plotter asked for encrypted radios and did not receive those. I guess the coup plotter said that you gotta be so careful as to what you say in Venezuela that you would need these encrypted radios to feel comfortable for the different factions who would need to be involved in the coup all communicate and stay on one page. Now, one, odd thing about this story to me is that the Venezuelan source, because there's the main source here is a Venezuelan military official who was involved in the coup plotting, would give away the equipment that he's looking to use, because then you would think now the Maduro government is out there seeking out a means to disrupt that. Now maybe the Maduro government has already achieved that technology or something like that, so now it's useless, and that's why he's saying it. I think the other thing we just had to keep our eyes on is the possibility that, the Maduro regime is looking to, take shots at Trump in the U.S. media. And I don't think this came off as a positive story. I think it's one of those things that's easily billed as the fear that the mainstream media painted about Donald Trump, that he was just going to be this kind of dumb brute, maybe drunk or asleep at the wheel, and, plotting a coup with some coup plotters who are actually sanctioned by the U.S. government, which is, I think, where I got off on this tangent, doesn't seem to be, the most kind of establishment playbook, at least foreign policy. I do want to mention that Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone Project have been doing some pretty good reporting on the work of U.S.-funded either human rights groups or NGO groups, just different non-governmental agencies that go out and either produce propaganda or stir up problems in these countries. We get the more obvious example like what happened in Ukraine, or the backing, the direct backing of the opposition with weapons like in Venezuela, Syria. But in other countries, such as China or Venezuela, you see a lot more of these, NGO style groups that aren't necessarily propping up military factions all the time, but are more supporting propaganda. And, I even have to admit something that I got wrong towards the very beginning of the show was that there were some elections and polling coming out of Venezuela saying that the Maduro government was pretty unpopular there. But I think it turns out that, at best, the opposition is maybe like popular with 50% of the population. And like I said, I think that's at best, even though, there is a lot of problems with people there not having enough goods and currency inflation and all these terrible economic things, that are at least in part a result of the country's socialist policies. You certainly, even with all this kind of U.S. government money being poured in to propagandize and influence those people, and then also create propaganda directed at the U.S. audience, they're at best able to muster about 50% of the support. And my guess is that the reality is it's actually a little bit less. One of the big problems in Venezuela is that their infrastructure for their big imports, I believe oil and gold being the two major ones, have really crumbled and deteriorated over the years. Again, this is at part the fault of the Venezuelan government. Socialist governments don't work. And so, that's part of the problem with the infrastructure. And I don't want to pretend that it's not, but I think a huge influence that is largely ignored, especially among the libertarian community, and I think probably in the mainstream at large, is just the huge impact that the U.S. sanctions have had on the Venezuelan economy and the infrastructure for their main natural resources. So here's where we bring in China. Maduro announced, I believe last weekend, that the Venezuelans have made a deal with China for China to come in and support and, improve the infrastructure for their oil and their gold industries. Now, I think this is actually a really interesting story that really doesn't seem to have been covered at all, just because of how it ties in with everything the United States is trying to do geopolitically. Now, the deterioration of the Venezuelan oil capacities has really reduced the amount of oil that Venezuela is pumping out. So with this investment, there's going to be a lot more oil on the market, and this has some important significance for China because the U.S. sanctions against Iran are going to make it at least a lot more difficult for the United States, China to get Iranian oil coming at the beginning of November. I believe November 4th is the date the U.S. oil sanctions against Iran will take place. And so, you have a situation here where by the United States, by being hawkish towards everyone and trying to keep both Venezuela and Iran at arm's length, is just creating a situation where China is going to become more tied into the Venezuelan oil industry and gold industry because of the United States pressure on Iran. Now, I mean, these kind of things could have happened anyways, but certainly if the United States has a friendlier relationship with Venezuela, it would make a lot more sense for Venezuela to import oil to the United States or, keep it in the local region. But now, more of that oil will probably be going to China, especially if, U.S. sanctions against Iran really come down hard and China is either able to import less oil from Iran or, import oil, but only at a higher price. I think this does go to show just that, and I don't think this is unique about Trump, but his overall grand strategy foreign policy really doesn't make sense. If you look at what the kind of official documents coming out of the Trump administration have said, that their foreign policy objectives are to counter the great powers of China and Russia. However, if you look at the results of the U.S. policy dealing specifically with Iran and Venezuela here, two countries that, are very significant. Iran has a large population, is positioned very importantly in the Middle East. It's a very important country for Shia Muslims who make up about 20% of the, Islamic world population. And both of these countries have huge energy reserves. And rather than trying to win these countries over from Russia and China, we've basically just set up the conditions where they have no choice but to reach out to Russia and China. I mean, the Cold War is over. So, Venezuela could be as communist as they want. It really shouldn't matter to the United States. I mean, it's a bad thing, I think. I think the Venezuelan people live less free, impoverished lives because their government is communist. But at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt me, and it's not going to. Communism isn't going to spread to the United States, and if it does, it's certainly not going to be because some Venezuelans decided they liked communism. And with the Iranians, there's no reason to hate Iran. I've talked about this on the show's past, but if you look at the people who have actually attacked the United States, like the 9/11 hijackers and some of the jihadist sects, most of them ideologically have also been enemies of the Iranian state. And so it's not like by attacking Iran or by, going after Iran's allies like Bashar al-Assad and our general Middle East policy and our, sanctions regime and backing out of the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with Iran. All these things have just resulted in Iran looking more and more towards Russia and China to cut ties with than the United States. And so these ties have, put China in an advantageous position when dealing with both Iran and Venezuela. And, I think over time we'll just see that it's only going to be to the benefit of China that the United States carries out these policies. To talk a little bit more about China, again, specifically back to the Gray Zone project, there was an article there by Ben Norton, and I'm sorry I forgot the co-author's name, but I will link to this article in the show notes page. And this talks about the UN report that said, I believe 1 million Chinese Uyghurs were in re-education camps. Now, I think most people in the United States probably think of, these Asian countries, Russia, Pakistan, China, India as more or less united countries. Now, China, there is a problem with Taiwan. But even mainland China, you have Tibet and then the Uyghurs, which are in Western China, really don't see themselves as Chinese and of part of Greater China. And so, these states are much more fractured than I think that the common person thinks, who just sees, a big Chinese blob on the map. So you have this group in China, in the west part of China, above Tibet, north of Tibet. And they are Muslims. And I mean, it's hard to, you really can't deny that this is an ethnic group that's suppressed by some extent by the kind of ruling class in China. Qi and I believe the Han Chinese are the ethnic majority. However, I mean, there is a scale of mistreatment. You have straight up, apartheid or states like Saudi Arabia where it's actually, illegal to be and preach a different religion. And then, that ranges all the way down to situations something like you have with, some U.S. laws where, they don't explicitly outright say like, it's illegal to be this skin color or something like that. But, you can't deny, especially some of these drug laws, specifically end up targeting minority communities. And so somewhere in that range, lies what is happening to the Uyghurs. But this UN report made it seem like it was really bad, like it was on the extreme end of things. That I think they said that 1 million people were imprisoned, and then like another million were in re-education camps. Now, it turns out, as Ben Norton uncovered, that actually this wasn't a UN report, so it's not like some UN inspectors went out there and found these camps of these people and talked to these witnesses and were able to estimate this many people were in camps. It was actually one UN official who happened to be an American, I suppose, went on record saying that he had proof from an organization that receives funding from the U.S. government that many people were imprisoned and in re-education camp. Now, he didn't provide any proof to the UN Council, and there's really nothing, documented to show this is the case. However, you instantly had media outlets like Reuters take up the story and just say that, reported as fact, or reported as this is what the UN report said, giving it a lot more legitimacy than the truth, that this was just one non-supported statement from a U.S. official. So I guess the question here is, why does the United States care what happens to the Uyghurs? I mean, we let terrible things happen to people and sometimes support. Look at the Houthis in Yemen or the Palestinians in Israel, right? We actually support the terrible things that are happening to those oppressed minorities. But this one is important because there's a lot of them. I believe there's over 100 million Uyghurs, and I think some of that population actually bleeds over into eastern Afghanistan. Not everybody knows this, but it doesn't look like it on all maps, but there's a very thin strip of land that actually connects Afghanistan to China. And so I guess if the Chinese government ever got too problematic for the United States, this would be the kind of group that we could arm and train to fight against the Chinese government. And certainly, the U.S. officials will be able to point out places and areas of oppression by the Chinese government of these, oppressed minority people. However, we'll blow it out of proportion and make the situation a whole lot worse. Look at Syria. The last couple of things I'll mention here is at one point during the Trump administration, and, it's around the time that Trump is looking to impose the harsher sanctions on North Korea, that the United States was actually bombing Uyghurs in East Afghanistan. Now, I think, there's a few explanations for this. One could possibly be that these are some fighters maybe returning from Syria, or, they pledged allegiance or affiliations to the Islamic State, as there were a lot of, ISIS Uyghur fighters in Syria. But, also could have been a favor by the United States, on behalf of the Chinese government to take these guys out in Afghanistan where the United States could, bomb. And then just a role that, this is a pretty significant when they talked about the foreign fighters in Syria. These people did make up a good number of those. So, this whole kind of thing where the United States is looking and propping up these groups, well, who knows how much of that money isn't going to the most extreme elements of it, like it always seems to do. All right, before I get out of here this week, I do want to talk about the Korea summit that happened in Pyongyang, North Korea. I think in a very, very significant moment, you had the South Korean President Moon Jae-in arrive in North Korea and embrace North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. I think some people like to pretend that Moon Jae-in embracing Kim Jong-un is him symbolically forgiving all of Kim Jong-un's war crimes, and not that this guy isn't able to see the situation from the whole picture, really understanding that, yeah, Kim Jong-un may be a bad guy. He's probably committed some crimes, crimes against humanity type situation. However, a nuclear war is only going to annihilate the North Korean people and probably kill a lot of South Koreans as well. If you just continue to go the sanctions route, Kim Jong-un is only continuing to eat while his people don't. And so even if it's not the most pleasant thing in the world to embrace a dictator, this may be the best thing that could happen realistically to the North Korean people. You know what I mean? If you assassinate Kim Jong-un, it could create a lot of instability. And so creating a situation where there's more wealth in North Korea and we get Kim Jong-un to give up some of his weapons in the process seems like a pretty good deal. A couple things that I saw come out of the summit that I think are important. One, there's going to be a push for these joint economic plans. One of these plans is like what was going on, the Sunshine Policy, where you have like these villages or factories kind of along the DMZ, and half the workforce is North Korean and half the workforce is South Korean or something like that. And so, these kind of ventures are cool. It helps to, bring the people together. And I think that always prevents war. Well, not prevents war, but makes it less likely. And it just creates a situation where you have more and more South and North Koreans invested in not going to war with each other. Next, North Korea said that they would allow international inspectors to come into the country to witness the destruction of missile and nuclear sites. Now, from my understanding, North Korea didn't necessarily agree that next Tuesday they're going to go out and send an official invitation to the international inspectors, and that the international inspectors will be welcome in, the second week in November for the destruction of this nuclear site. However, Kim Jong-un saying that, this is something he would accept is an important step, because one of the United States pieces in our, demands in North Korea is that the destruction is verifiable. And so that's what these international inspectors would provide. Now, I think one problem here is an attachment to Kim Jong-un's, concession is that the United States has to make, I guess, reciprocal concessions, whatever that means. I'm sure that, they will work that out in the details, and it'd probably be some form of either economic aid or sanctions, easing from the U.S. government, or it could possibly be, moving troops either out of South Korea or maybe certain military equipment out of the region. Now, another thing that hasn't happened yet, and that's a big one, is that the United States is asking North Korea, I guess demanding is a better word, that North Korea give the United States a list of all of their sites and weapons. That way, I guess we could verify the destruction of them. That seems to me to be something that probably won't just come in like one email. It would be slowly revealed over time. But all being said that, this announcement does seem to be a good thing. One that's probably a little less important, but in some ways more important. The leaders announced that they intend to place a bid to host the 2032 Olympic Games in a joint venture. So hopefully the Olympic Committee doesn't do something stupid and just disallow it, and that, this could really be a commitment, a 14-year commitment to, it'd be a really cool thing to have the 2018 Winter Olympic Games kick off like a 14-year span of time that the Koreans moved closer together, and then had this joint games in 2032 to kind of celebrate all the hard work in between. And so it's probably, still a pretty distant dream at this point, but I think that, the possibility is real, and I think that's what this announcement from the Korean leaders really says. Also worth noting that Donald Trump tweeted out his support for these talks and I guess the Korean peace process. And again, as I said, I thought the reason that the North Koreans agreed to give up the remains of the U.S. soldiers was important, was because this would be something that we could constantly point to as just a really great thing. And Donald Trump is doing that, so all the better there. All right, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, libertarianinstitute.org, Libertarian Union on Facebook, at KYAAALE on Twitter, and I'd really appreciate if everybody went to patreon.com and thought about supporting the show there. I do need to create some new bonus content for you guys, but, the donating to the show will help to cover, the monthly fees that go along with it, and hopefully gain some improved equipment and doing more interviews soon. So thanks everybody so much, for listening and sharing the show.